My dad was a carpenter, so blind alphabet in a way is his fault. He made me learn the name of every wood, every species of wood that he worked with. He had a big workshop with lots of machines, and he made tables and he made lounge suites and he made beds for people to sleep on. He was a carpenter, but he could do lots of other things as well. So he died in 1985 and I inherited all his stuff. And between 1985 and 1990, I would say, before I started with blind alphabet, I went into dictionaries and words, and I studied plants, trees, and also wood. But this was his workbench that he worked on till he died in 1985. He died at the age of 63. I've passed him by, I'm now 69. And he learned the trade of woodworking. For his exams, he made a little ship. And the ship was quite nice. It had 2 little lamps on it, and he gave it to his sister, my aunt. Now all of them are now deceased. But my dad didn't become a carpenter just out of the blue. In the family we had this thing, which is made by my grandfather, my dad's dad. My dad's father died when my father was 6, and he was 47 years old. But he made this in India, and it's got written there, India, the 4th of May 1902. He was a prisoner of war, and he was about 17 years old in India. And it's a beautifully made thing with nice grooves on it. And his name is on this, Willem Boshoff, which is also my name. So it's a kind of family thing that we work with wood. And then my dad's name is Martinez. Now my son Martin is also a designer, and he also works mostly with wood. There's a hammer up there which belonged to my dad, a little hammer. It's called Estwing, an Estwing hammer. It's the best. People think it's the best hammer in the world. It's also the most expensive hammer in the world. And he made decent things. And my son, when he studied, he found out that I had this hammer. And he was so impressed that I had an Estwing hammer, and it was so old there that he made the big version of the same hammer. And that's us. We work with wood a lot. They didn't have electricity when they started in Windhoek. They had to work with hand-operated tools, no electricity. And we learned like that as well. And sometimes those tools work far better than the electrical tools, because you have to be more careful. And you also have to know certain skills. And those hand skills are very important. When we talk about the blind alphabet and the things that I'm doing, it's about skill. It's about doing the very best I can with a small piece of wood to try and enchant people. My house is full of objects from my family who made these things. And many of them are very old, and they all still work. This little chair folds up. It's a folding chair. You can still sit on it. And made by my father. But my son Martin made this little thing. What you do is you spin the thing, and it goes round and round and round, and then it points at you. Then you must buy the beer, or you've stolen some, or it indicates something. But this is very special because it's the hardest wood in the country, lead wood, and it's perfectly symmetrical. So all of these aspects of making, you can't just throw things together and hope for the best, although sometimes that also can work. But then you must know what you are doing when you're throwing things together even. In this box, there are lots of tools. Spoke shaves, these things, they use these for making vats. We call it a bospick. It's just to hack away your branches off trees. So it's for rough work. This thing here is more for sculpture. It's called an adze. To hollow out sometimes you can hollow out a canoe, but when you make sculpture, you need to hollow out sometimes some shapes. This workbench, it's been in the family. It was in some other person's possession before 1943, when my dad studied carpentry. And now it's mine, and I will not let it go for anything. I won't work on it anymore. I don't want to damage it anymore. I started making blind alphabet on this workbench. So I would say my dad, my grandfather, who didn't probably think that he was setting a trend or anything. That's my tradition, is I make it happen with my hands. I studied sculpture. Now, I wasn't into making figures of people. I was trying to understand the world, trying to understand form and shape. And when I was a student, I made these weird little objects to try and understand wood. These two pieces are made from wild olive. And I just wanted to see how far I can push wood and what wood would do if I did this to wood, if I polished it and played with it. These were made in the early 1970s. The blind alphabet starts in 1990. But when we studied, we started looking at contemporary sculpture, British sculpture, American sculpture. And I tried to buy as many books as possible to learn what sculpture could be. Well, how sculptors can take other forms. When we grew up, we didn't have books in the house. I got a present, a history of art book, when I was in standard 9, I think. And I memorized much of it. So I discovered the dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary, and many other dictionaries, but I read through the Oxford from page to page. I wrote my first dictionary to try and help me to teach color theory, and it was a dictionary of color. And I made an artwork to try and say that colors are not only what we see they are, but they are also the words we make for them, the words that we describe them by. That was my first proper dictionary. And then after that I studied more things. Plants, for example, I made plant lists. I needed to make this wooden cabinet full of 370 blocks of different species of wood. So I was looking for different species, and I learned the names of trees. What words mean began to tell me how things came about, how life was at first developed. And I learned about evolution and about how through the centuries things adapted and came to be the way they are now. And through trying to understand English, I learned about form and shape, because there are specific words for specific forms. Every science has its own vocabulary, and many of these words describe what things look like. Now, in sculpture, we never learned about language, and we never learned about what things are called. We just used ordinary language. There's no scientific language to describe things in sculpture. So I thought, since I am discovering words that are not known by the intelligentsia of the art world, before I started Blind Alphabet, I wanted to have fun with the English intelligentsia. So I collected words like, for example, onolatry. But onolatry is the worship of donkeys. It's similar to idolatry, which is the worship of idols or demons. Words like, for example, cataglottism. But before I could really make some serious damage to the English profession and the English-speaking intelligentsia, I thought, but I should do this with sculpture and with the words that I had seen with the sculpture. So I started collecting words that would be difficult for people who are champions of sight. It was aimed at them, the art critics, the historians of art, the people who pride themselves on being visually informed. And the people I chose to let this thing loose were blind people. I wanted people that they look down upon to come to their rescue. So in order to do this, I started making these sculptures of these shapes, and I had in mind to hide the sculptures, or to find a way to make the sculptures invisible. Because how do you make sighted people blind? That was the big question. Then the answer was for me to make boxes and to put a lid on the box so that you can't see the sculpture, and that you would need somebody to help you to see it. And that somebody would then be a blind person. And then the other thing is, a blind person doesn't go to an art gallery ever because they can't see paintings. It doesn't help to stand in front of a painting and describe it to a blind person. You might as well describe anything. They don't know what it is. A drawing or a painting is lost to them. Sculpture they can touch, but they're not allowed to. It says don't touch in all the galleries. So I thought I must solve all these problems in my blind alphabet to make blind people find one thing and then the next thing, and then not be lost. They must know where they are. They must never be lost. But it's the sighted people, those people who are visually aware and who are so clever, they must be lost. It must be, to them, it must be a graveyard of sculpture. So I made it look like a bit like a graveyard, so that when a sighted person sees it for the first time, it looks like a cemetery. It's got all these black things in it. So I see my work as a book. You go to the art gallery, and as a sighted person, it's a cemetery. But as a blind person, it's a book. But the very first thing that is very important, in the gallery it'll say, don't touch, all over. But I insist that they put don't touch next to my work. And people see this, don't touch, and they see the cemetery. And they get very angry, and I want that. Because I want people to feel what it feels like, in a small, stupid way, to be a bit blind, to be robbed, to be deprived, to be disenfranchised is the clever word these days, to be at the bottom end of things. And then the blind people can't read because they can't see. And they can't see that it says don't touch. And they know there's something there for them. So they bump into it. Braille. They'll immediately feel and they'll see, and they start reading and they start enjoying the work. And then these poor sighted people who have degrees in history of art and in art criticism will come along and check this thing out and check what's going on here. They will ask the blind people, and this has happened almost wherever I've gone with this work. They'll ask the blind people, can you help us? What's going on here? And then the blind people will begin to explain the shapes to them, because every description in Braille tells you exactly what the shape is, what it stands for. It's made in wood, so it's easy to touch and it's easy to pick up, and it tells you when I made it, what the kind of wood I used, all sorts of details about the morphology, about the etymology, about as much detail as I can. I didn't write a silly essay or a down-to-earth, sort of easy-to-read essay in Braille for the blind people. I make it at first I made it as difficult as possible. I've calmed down a little bit in the later works. When I made it in 1993, the whole world was still reading Braille. But the internet has taken over and it's made it possible for blind people to carry on with life without Braille. So I have to reinvent the world, and we have to find new ways to present the work, which is why we are trying to work with sound. Now we're going to try and also work with music. Jaco Meyer is one of the very few people in the country who qualified in the composition of contemporary classical music. He's got the patience and he's got the understanding of the work, and I think he's going to bring something to the work in his musical notation. Some of it is riveting to me, at least. And I think it goes very well with the work. And in the presentation that the future holds for the blind alphabet, it's going to play a major part. He finds a way of unearthing weird and wonderful sounds as if they come from the objects themselves. So all of this is going into a very exciting direction for me now. You come to the dead end of one way of thinking, but new ways open. I won't stop with the Braille. I think the Braille still makes people look like prophets if they can read it. But I think there are going to be fewer and fewer people who can read Braille as time goes on. But the thinking takes a lot of time to try and figure out what sculptures should look like, because you don't just want to make silly stuff. You want to make something that's sculptural, going to challenge the idea of sculpture sort of thing. And also make my dad proud, because he would have been looking over my shoulder. And if I mess it up, he would be angry with me. And so I try to make the wood look special. So that when this blind person opens this box, and a couple of sighted people that stand there, he must hear an exclamation from, wow, what's this? Look at that. He hears that, he can't see, but he can hear them exclaiming, they're interested. So I have to stay on top of my game with this thing, to try and make decent things so that I can generate some response and some interaction between the blind and the sighted. One walks around a lot and you see things like pebbles or stones, and we collected stones when I was small. My daughter Emma and I are the same. We go into the veld and we collect stones. And we used to spend hours and hours looking for a beautiful stone. Is this a diamond? And we never found a diamond. And stones they have a history. They were formed over a long period of time. They started off very rough, the pebbles, and then they were shaped by water, and they never, if you find a pebble, like you can see a lot of pebbles around here, these pebbles are from the hill at the back. But a pebble, when you pick it up, you can be sure it's hundreds of kilometers from where it started perhaps. Otherwise it wouldn't be round. It needs to tumble. And it needs water. I told Benny, I would like to make a rock that looks like it's fallen out of the night sky. It has to be black. Now, I didn't know that you could polish Belfast black, so black. But I learned at Rao, we made a circle of knowledge there. So I had some idea, but the circle of knowledge had to do with text and language that befuddled and baffled the intelligent people at the university. So it came after the blind alphabet had started. My idea with philosophy is they speak and I take the thoughts. But I have to make thoughts real. In English you have a word for that. To make the abstract real, they say it's to reify. It comes from Latin R-E-I-S, reis, which is a thing. It's to make a thing. You have too much talk, make a thing. They used to say it in Greek in another way. When you have too much thought, put it. And the word in Greek for put, Just put it, show me. Is thesis. A thesis is something you put. You go and check it out in the dictionary, it's what it means. So I'm trying to come back down to earth and not to live in my head. I live in my sculpture. I put things, I make things, I reify, make the abstract real. You have to see the stuff, not just talk it. That's what I do.